Welcome back into I'm Bored, Why the Hell Not, Episode 6. And because it is Episode 6, we of course dedicate it to the man. Let's talk a little bit about some of the recent news going on in the world of sports in the Kansas City area, starting with the announcement yesterday from Jeremiah Tilmon that he will in fact play basketball at the University of Missouri, joining Michael Porter Jr. there under a brand new coach, Quanzo Martin. Of course, this was met with a lot of good thoughts from Mizzou fans, but even those who aren't Mizzou fans who think it's very important that Mizzou finally got a big-time recruit out of the city of St. Louis. Of course, Tilmon was a guy who initially had signed with Illinois and is now going to, in fact, play for Mizzou after asking to be released from his letter of intent, which Coach Brad Underwood allowed him to do. That brought up today's monologue on Between the Lines with Kevin Keatsman, who decided to consider Tilmon a transfer. Keatsman, of course, looking for a way to make this sound like a bad deal for Missouri, decided to lump Tilmon in with all the other transfers taking place in college basketball. Now, Keatsman does have a good point in the fact that maybe the transfer rule has gotten a little bit out of control as so many players move one college to another. But by trying to lump Tilmon into this group, this is a kid who signed on to play with John Gross. John Gross was then let go and Brad Underwood was brought in. So this wasn't the coach that brought Jeremiah Tilmon to Illinois. So, shouldn't this player be allowed to go play for a coach that he chooses, not one that's chosen for him? What Jeremiah Tilmon did, and what Michael Porter Jr. did, and what a lot of other players do when they ask for their release because of a coaching change, should be completely allowed. Why should a player be stuck with the same system if it's not the same coach he agreed to play on? But Keatsman wanted to try to pull this in and even called him a transfer. Well, pretty much a transfer. It's kind of the same thing. No, it's nowhere near the same thing. This is not a kid who went and played a year for a school and isn't getting enough playing time, so he decided to transfer. This is a kid who wanted to play for one coach, that coach is no longer there, and he decided to go play somewhere else. But if we can read between the lines a little bit, here's what I think's really going on. Things are getting a little too good at old Mizzou for Keatsman. Now you'll remember Keatsman long ago thought Mizzou was going to the Big Ten. That backfired. Ever since then, he hasn't had a whole lot to say good about old Mizzou. And Mizzou has helped him out by being, quite honestly, pretty bad in most things, considering the records in basketball especially, even football the last couple of years, and of course with the protest and walkout that happened with the football team a few years ago. So there's plenty of ammunition if Keatsman wants to continue taking shots at Mizzou. We don't have to try to lump them into everything that's wrong with college basketball and take a real liberty by calling Jeremiah Tilmon a transfer just because things are starting to look up. Some of the other things going on in sports over the last couple of days, including in media, I noticed a change on Fesco in the Morning recently where Josh Klingler is now bringing them out of the breaks and doing those often over-promised and under-delivered teases. So basically, they're following the formula now of a first take or an undisputed, where Klingler basically sets the agenda and then Mike Welch and Bob Fesco react. That's okay, it might work, but the only problem with trying to follow the formula of another show is sometimes it can be tricky to do, and especially when it's a show that a lot of people don't like the format anyway, where it's just a host lobbing a topic and two people arguing. Fesco in the Morning is going to have to be very careful about how they treat this. Now to our ongoing segment called Three Questions. Yes, it's a creative idea. And equally creative are the people who have chose to do it first. Frank Bowl was victim number 1, Curtis Seaboldt victim number 2. It's hard to book guests like this. Anyway, I asked Curtis number 1, why not? What are the 3 best barbecue plates at 3 different joints in the Kansas City area?
I would say the burn-ins at Joe's Kansas City Barbecue. I would say a short end and the fries extra crispy at Gates. And I would say probably the pulled pork sandwich at what's the place? The place that used to be the Beaumont Club. Char Bar. Yeah, but really anything at Char Bar, but yeah, that'd be it.
Besides his appetite, Curtis is also known for his impressions. So question number 2, which impression does he believe he does best?
Best impression. The easiest one, probably the best one, the one I get the most compliments for would be Carl Peterson, maybe Roy Williams. Those are the ones I've done the most. I'd have to say probably them, probably Carl.
And finally, along those same lines, I asked Curtis what's the one impression that he would never do in front of someone, even if they asked him to.
Well, I did an impression down line to Ernie Harwell while he was on the air back in the day. Probably Soren.
No matter how much he wanted.
Yeah.
That'll do it for episode 6 of I'm Bored, Why the Hell Not? It's nice weather outside. I think I'm going to go do some grilling, maybe throw some steaks on the barbecue. Wait a second. Segment idea. Grill food, then talk about it during a segment.